Shabbat shalom, everyone. You may be seated. Many of you in our community know that 11 of us from Bergen County have returned from a 2.5-day mission to Poland and the Ukraine, where our responsibility was to bring supplies and resources and moral support to the people of Poland, Ukraine, first responders, and those who are part of the refugee crisis. Many of the people who attended have connective tissue to different organizations within Bergen County: the Jewish Federation of Northern New Jersey, the Kaplan JCC, and a lot are also connected here to Temple Emanu-El. I've asked 4 of the 6 people who were on our mission from Temple Emanu-El to speak today and share some words. 2 of those people who I asked can't be with us. They're in Florida on spring break. But even in the midst of their spring break, they jumped on a plane from Florida, met us in Poland, and spent their spring break with them and their 15-year-old child, helping the people of Poland and Ukraine. That was Scott and Trevor Osfeld. So Scott wrote a piece that I'd like to share on his behalf, and then I will close with the piece that Trevor wrote, his 15-year-old son, on his behalf. And then we'll have the different members of our community express from different angles things they saw and things that we did and can do. These remarks are from Scott Osfeld. Roughly 100 years ago, my great-grandfather, Ephraim Molensky, was killed in a pogrom in Ukraine. My great-grandmother, Fega, a young widow, bravely left the country with her 4 children in tow. One of those children was my grandpa Sam, a man so important in my life that I named my son Trevor Samuel in his memory. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "The arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice." 4 generations after this great injustice was perpetrated on my family, my son Trevor and I returned to Ukraine, this time not as victims, but as people in a position to help. The passage of decades has also transformed Poland itself, from a place where millions of Jews took their last breaths to a country that is now a safe haven for thousands of Jews among the millions of Ukrainian refugees who have sought refuge in that country. These surprising juxtapositions were a recurring theme of the 3-day Temple Emanu-El humanitarian trip through Poland and the Ukraine. Everywhere we went, we experienced the heartbreak, observing the unfolding emotional and physical tragedy on an epic scale. We were overwhelmed by the logistical challenge to adequately meet dire needs for the displaced Ukrainians. And yet everywhere we went, we bore witness to the extensive efforts the Temple Emanu-El community and individuals and organizations from around the world were mobilizing to alleviate the situation. While we left behind 9,000 pounds of essential supplies, we take with us an indelible memory of the hardship facing the displaced Ukrainian women and children, but also the global effort to help. It will take time to fully absorb the suffering that we witnessed. The many good deeds are easy to recognize. Among them, most memorable was the incredible mobilization of the JCC in Krakow, led by Jonathan Ornstein, to provide food, housing, clothing, and language skills to refugees, regardless of background or religion. B, a Ukrainian American who is a partner at a prominent private equity firm, who has taken a leave of absence from that firm to extract his family from Ukraine, and now spends his days brokering needed supplies to his country. C, the devotion of Eric and his wife, Polish citizens who daily risk their lives to cart supplies into Ukraine while working to alleviate the suffering of the Ukrainian women and children who are living in Poland. D, the Jewish Agency for Israel in Jaffe, who rented out 4 Warsaw hotels to house Jews and prepare them for Aliyah, an operation whose efficiency was unfortunately honed from decades of having to save Jews from refugee crises, and whose help extended to a non-Jewish family we met because they descended from the righteous among nations, a woman who was responsible for saving a Jewish boy in the Holocaust, and her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren were now being relocated to Israel as a result. And E, the international organizations with boots on the ground to help anyone in need crossing over from the Ukraine, such as the United Sikhs, paramedics from Italy, and the Joint Distribution Committee. Most of all, Scott closes, we will never forget the courage of the constant flow of Ukrainian women crossing the border who left their male relatives behind to fight for freedom and packed their lives into suitcases to ensure the safety and survival of their children. Rabbi Pupko, who attended our trip, taught a teaching from the Mishnah, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor v'lo ata ben chorin lehibatel mimena. We are not responsible to finish the task, but we are not free to desist from it either. This is our responsibility moving forward. I now would like to call on Josh Weingast, one of our other 4 participants, to share some reflections with you. And then he'll be followed, I don't know the order, but Steve Rogers, Arthur Sinensky, and Amy Zagan will each share some thoughts and reflections from different perspectives about our holy mission.
Thank you, Rabbi. The Jewish geography that went on between Scott and 2 Russian women who had just flown in from Israel waiting for their mother, about hometown, they were from the same town, was incredible. It was interesting. Anyway, I'm Josh Weingast. I'm Fran's husband. I go through life that way. She was president here a couple of years ago. We've all seen the images in the news, and we generally understand the travesty of what's going on over there. However, being there made me realize some elements are even worse than what we see on TV. The magnitude is shocking. In Poland, we were constantly told the influx of people has diminished dramatically. But at the border, we witnessed days-long waits and endless streams of people still entering. The breakup of the families, as Scott just mentioned, is gut-wrenching. In Krakow and at the borders, the displaced people are everywhere, but one thing is missing: young and middle-aged men. You realize it's predominantly women and children and their pets. Think about what this means for these families, the burden on the mothers, these kids who may never see their fathers again. The similarity of these people to our society is scary. Yes, there is generally a lack of racial and ethnic diversity across Ukraine. That aside, these people could be coming from any community in our country. The masses clearly included an array of upper, middle, and lower income families. The middle and upper class were waiting at the border in their Skodas and BMWs, and those who didn't own a car took public transportation. I was in a supermarket in western Ukraine, an area that, for most part, Russia has not yet gotten to, and many people are still trying to go about their daily routines. These people looked like they'd be from all walks of life, just gathering groceries and having a cup of coffee. It could have been the shop right in Englewood. Who knows how long it'll be before those folks are forced to flee again, or 2. You can't help but think about how lucky we are to be geographically removed from this type of invasion, and how meaningless things like the traffic of the George Washington Bridge and the increased price of gas really are. Once in Poland, the Ukrainians are probably a little relieved to find it's not complete chaos. And even for those without a predetermined destination, there's at least a place to sleep and get some food, medical attention, and supplies. The first stop is usually near the border, where they can stay for a day or 2 with time to decide where to go next. Then it's a bus or a train to a city like Krakow or elsewhere, and there's another shelter waiting for them for a night or 2. But these places are far from pleasant. Imagine a giant building the size of a Home Depot with 2,000 cots and a row of porta potties in the parking lot. Then think about where you take a shower after you've already been traveling for days just to get out of your homeland. Or where you go to clean up your 2-year-old son who's just barely toilet trained and has had an accident. And then imagine where you go after your allotted few days are up. One thing struck me: everyone we saw was fairly well put together. Their clothing was neat and not ragged. Their hair was brushed neatly. No one was disheveled, and many found a way to smile. It was an interesting juxtaposition that says a lot about who these people really are. They all have a name and a story. Anna is an elementary school teacher with a 10-year-old son. Anastasia is a 23-year-old who works for an IT company, lives with her mother, and whose great-grandparents helped hide Jews from the Nazis. Arim is an 11-year-old dancer, just like Harlow, with a cat named Messi. Each of them is now living in Poland. Their husbands and brothers are fighting in Ukraine. The list is 3.7 million long and growing. Everyone we spoke with thanks us immensely for being there, and all the supplies and the money that our community has provided. It was a small dent, but incredibly meaningful to them. For them, I say thank you to all of you for what you've done and that we've done collectively as a community. Let's not stop doing what we can.
We tried to split up what everybody would say, and then we didn't know what Scott was saying, and since he said everything, and you'll now hear for the third time. I'm Steve Rogers, and it was an honor to be on this mission. The seemingly never-ending wave of people with very, very few belongings was staggering. We watched as hundreds and hundreds of people, 97% of them women and children, as you heard, walked across the border after waiting 12, 18, or more hours. Many women were carrying babies in their arms, covered in a blanket that they had received somewhere along the way. Many had left their homes days, in some cases weeks earlier, with only 15, 20, 30 minutes to take their most critical possessions, their papers, maybe their pets, perhaps some memories. Entire lives were reduced to a single backpack or a single suitcase. They entered Poland not knowing when or even if they would be able to return home. When or even if they might see their sons, brothers, and fathers. The look of shock and despair on face after face after face was overwhelming and forever will be etched in my mind's eye. But the most amazing thing, Josh mentioned it, was the fact that while many only had the clothes on their back, they were nice clothes, and they were carrying iPhones. I always equated refugee with poor. I was wrong. They're poor, middle class, wealthy. I realized that like 80 years ago, these devastated souls were you and me. They were our sons and daughters. They were our babies. But just as we have seen the worst of humanity over these past 30 days, we also witnessed some of the best. For Poland, a country about the size of New Mexico, with a population of 38 million, has taken in about 5% of that, over 2 million people. The way Polish citizens of every ilk were taking in refugees into their homes, bringing food to help people, and just trying to help was so inspiring. Refugees were greeted by a sea of tents, hundreds and hundreds of volunteers from around the world, of all faith communities, providing food, clothing, and basic assistance. I'm deeply proud and inspired by the way the Bergen County Jewish community is responding to this crisis of epic proportion, and similarly by the fact that at each of the many locations where we were with refugees, we saw Jewish and Israeli organizations always at the front of the line, always the first tent, looking to help everyone, Jew and non-Jew alike, that crossed the border. First among them, the JCC Krakow, and we're honored that our friend Vicky, president of the American Friends of JCC Krakow, who was with us throughout the mission, is here with us celebrating Shabbat today. 80 years ago, in the very locations where we stood, many hid the fact that they were Jewish just to survive. There were 3.5 million Jews in Poland in 1939. By the end of the war, 6 years later, it was about 300,000, 90% gone. We came to Poland to help those who were fleeing a ruthless madman just across the border. We stood where our brothers and sisters and millions of innocent people fought a different madman and fought for their lives just 80 short years ago. We stood and openly declared who we were and how proud we were to be known as the people of Chesed. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Arthur Sinensky, and I was equally privileged to be part of this mission. Although back just 2 days now, I still have not fully come to terms with what I witnessed over the past week. So I indulge you, please bear with me over the next few minutes. On a purely personal note, this mission was deeply meaningful to me. My 4 grandparents migrated to this country in the early 1900s. My mother's parents from Belarus, and my father's parents from Poland. They ran for their lives and escaped to make a better life in America for themselves and their families. In 1944, my father, of blessed memory, Private First Class Irving Sinensky, returned to Europe as a soldier in Patton's army, where he earned the Silver Star Medal in the Battle of the Bulge. Though a highly decorated war hero, and as many of that greatest generation, he rarely spoke of his war experience. But he did teach me to do what's right and help those in need through action and tzedakah, and especially do everything you can to help the State of Israel survive due to its centrality to the well-being of all Jews. So after everything my ancestors and your ancestors experienced over the last 100 years, pogroms, World War II, liberation of death camps, I was truly privileged as the 3rd generation of Sinenskys to return to Poland on a humanitarian mission as a proud American Jew, traveling with other proud American Jews and connect with Polish, Ukrainian, and Israeli Jews in a collective rescue mission. I am totally in awe of the collective power and impact of these Jewish communities coming together in 2022 to rescue our brethren. No, this was not my grandfather's Eastern Europe. And just as we here in America succeeded beyond my grandparents' wildest dreams, so too did we find a community in Poland in a totally different place than the lands our ancestors fled over the last 100 years. As Rabbi Shudrich, the chief rabbi of Poland, said to us, and I quote, "Whereas we were historically the victims, we are now managing the rescue efforts." We found him planning a Seder for a few thousand people as among his top priorities when we met with him. Just 80 years after the worst calamity to befall us, a rabbi in Poland is planning a communal Seder for refugees from Ukraine and local Polish Jews. Now let me shift focus for a moment to the Herculean rescue efforts organized by the Israeli government in concert with the Joint Distribution Committee, or JDC, and Jewish Association for Israel, known as JAFE. When you walk along the border, you pass through an area of small booths and tables set up with supplies and food, some organized by NGOs and others set up by various countries. Most visible and prominent among those were the large blue and white flags of Israel, a touch point where refugees can immediately connect as a pivotal step in their long, tiresome journey. JAFE, the JDC, and Israeli government have set up headquarters in the Focus Hotel and 3 other hotels in Warsaw. They have leased most of the rooms and common facilities where between 300 and 400 people are living freely as they come to terms with their trauma and try to decide where they wish to settle. The Israeli government has flown in doctors, nurses, social workers, and government emissaries to comfort these people, treat their medical conditions and trauma, and give them support and stability as they come to terms with their new reality. And for those choosing to make Aliyah, the computer systems and support staff are on site working through the documentation and logistics of helping people transition to Israel, begin absorption, and start a new life. For some, It happens in a matter of days. For others, the process takes longer, since compliance with the law of return is a very serious matter. As one of the doctors told us, and I quote, "Imagine if you are Ukrainian and Jewish, you are called lucky because you can be absorbed into a lovely hotel and make your way to Israel." I stress this point because here in the U.S., in some quarters, there is widespread criticism of Israel's government and its policies. But in Poland and Ukraine, we witnessed the real raison d'etre of the Jewish state, the humanity, warmth, and dignity given to these tired souls at the most perilous times of their lives. We truly witnessed the ingathering of the exiles. Thus, my friends, we saw firsthand the miracle of the Jewish state, proud, strong Israelis running a well-oiled machine, welcoming the downtrodden with the help and support of the American Jewish community. So the next time you read the latest Israel bashing in your favorite paper of record, or hear from the squad in Congress that they want to defund defensive systems for Israel, please keep my words in mind. As I come to terms with what I just saw, I am deeply inspired to be part of this rescue effort, traveling as a representative of this special community, our temple and the JCC. I thank you for affording me this privilege, and thank you, Rabbi Kirshner and Steve Rogers, for your leadership and inspiration. Shabbat Shalom. I now want to introduce my friend and fellow traveling partner, Amy Zagan.
Good morning and Shabbat Shalom. My name is Amy Zagan, and I was one of 3 women who recently returned from the Temple Emanu-El Humanitarian Mission to Poland and the Ukraine. I am also a licensed clinical social worker, and I would like to take this opportunity to share with you through my lens as a mother, daughter, sister, and wife some of the traumatic stories that we witnessed and heard. Our first stop from the airport was the JCC in Krakow, where Jonathan Ornstein, the executive director, has created a safe haven for all, Jews and non-Jews alike, arriving in Poland. The kindness from our partners in Poland exemplifies the compassion with which the refugees are greeted when they arrive at the JCC. Jonathan told us that rather being referred to as refugees, they are called people in a refugee crisis and guests. Jonathan introduced us to Anna, a teacher from the Ukraine. Anna fled with her husband and 2 children and is currently living in temporary housing with a friend in Poland. She shared with me that she is still attempting to hold Zoom classes with her students to merely stay connected. War adversely affects those in combat, those remaining behind, and those who are able to flee, both physically and emotionally. Death, injury, violence, malnutrition, illness are just some of the physical consequences of war. On the thousands of faces that we saw of predominantly women, young children, and older adults fleeing Ukraine, we learned that many of the refugees had never even gone abroad, which is how they referred to leaving the Ukraine. Yet here they were, dazed, scared, and exhausted, not speaking the language, arriving with little or no belongings, carrying with them the uncertainty of those who remained behind in Ukraine, those who chose not to leave, those who continue to fight this war, or those too old or too disabled to flee. Rabbi Kirshner wrote so beautifully about a spirited 11-year-old girl with long red hair, wearing a Mickey Mouse sweatshirt and gold hoop earrings. She wanted to tell us her story, first in English and then translated to us from her native Russian. She talked about her missing cat. She spoke of the sirens that they would wake up in the middle of the night and then head to their basement for shelter. We know through research that chronic trauma can be passed down from one generation to the next. how can we begin to provide emotional help? We can listen to their stories with compassion and humanity and consider their world from their perspective and let them know that their suffering matters and, most importantly, they matter. Thank you.
I think you can all agree that traveling with these four souls was nothing short of a privilege for me and for those who went with us. I want to close with just adding in two important factors about all of you, and then I want to close with a short piece that Trevor Osfeld, who's 15 years young, shared. But before I do so, I want to echo Steve Rogers' sentiments of recognizing Vicki Warner, who's with us, who is the lay head of the JCC in Krakow, who is just doing holy work, really holy work. She took of her own time and energy and resources to be in Poland, to be a support system for the work that the JCC in Krakow is doing. We've had a long relationship with this institution, and now that they're doing this holy work, we know why. I also want to give a shout out to someone who is my friend and someone who I do a lot of work with from our synagogue, who's here, Guy Milo. Guy is the ideator and the CEO of J Squared Journeys, and it was because of Guy that we were able to do so much of what we did. You ever traveled with 129 bags that weigh 70 pounds each and 11 people? It's a fun process. But as soon as we landed in Poland, we had 5 Polish porters and 2 trucks ready to accept all of those bags. Everything moved like clockwork, and that's because of Guy and his team at J Squared, and I can't thank you enough. Just to give you a little bit of evidence of the kind of people who work with J Squared, the guide that we use, and we've always used in Poland, is an individual named Marek, who's just an incredible soul. And the condition of Marek working with us at this time was that he would have to be pulled away on phone calls. And what kind of phone calls was he doing? He was busy calling his friends to see who could host refugees, people involved in this crisis, at their homes. So every time he had to walk away from us or get on the phone, he was trying to say, could you house 2 families? Could you take 3? That's the nature of the people who are committed and working with J Squared. And Guy, we are honored to work with you and your company and the amazing and holy work you do. And thanks for celebrating Shabbat with us today. The last thing I just wanted to tell you, 2 things, is a special shout out to Lufthansa Airlines, who gave us the majority of these bags for free, and any of the additional fees were at a 65% reduction. Which was possible and amazing thanks to them. And every single bag made it directly on our flight to Frankfurt, and almost every single bag made it from our flight from Frankfurt to Krakow. The rest that didn't make it on the first flight made it a few hours later, and we are indebted to Lufthansa for their kindness and generosity during this time. The other thing is, all of you collected together about 35,000 pounds of supplies, diapers and baby formula, candy, socks, sleeping bags. And like anything, our worry is that they would sit in a stockpile somewhere and never be used. We brought them to the JCC in Krakow. They sat on the courtyard. We went to lunch. By the time we came back from lunch, they were already processed because of the way we packed them. Because we knew that socks were one place and candy was another place. They were already processed. And then we found out that within hours, the diapers, for example, just the diapers and the formula that we brought were already being taken and used by people who were part of the refugee crisis from Ukraine. Because at the JCC in Krakow that Jonathan Ornstein set up, he set up a free store that anyone could come and take whatever they need and leave. And what we did is we stocked them for at least 2 to 4 weeks worth of supplies, and you all made that happen. We also found out, we arrived on Monday, that by Wednesday morning, 30% of the supplies we brought, the appropriate ones, were already in the Ukraine. Sleeping bags, diapers, wipes, food, and essentials were already in the heart of towns around Kiev and Mariupol. They weren't sitting in a stockpile. They were instantly put to use, and we are racking our brains now at how to get the other 20,000 pounds over there quickly before Pesach. Just stay tuned, because we're going to need your partnership. So I want to close with Trevor's reflections. It was interesting having a 15-year-old on the trip. He was a fantastic addition, only added to everything we did. And these are his reflections from Trevor Osfeld. He's a freshman at Riverdale. I wasn't sure what to expect when my dad and I left from what was my spring break in Florida to go to Poland last weekend. All I knew is that I felt pretty awkward piling dozens of boxes of feminine hygiene products into my cart at Costco. My dad and I were also responsible for packing up more than 4,000 diapers, which is a pretty sad thing to be bringing into a war zone. It says a lot about who the real victims of war are. As the only teenager on the trip, I was probably the only person who saw mostly people my own age among the refugees. Teenage boys in high school, just like me, carrying all the possessions they could cram into a single suitcase, helping their moms, grandmas, and younger siblings. One boy crossing the border waved at me, and I considered how much we had in common as recently as 2 months ago, and how little we have in common today. For example, if the boy had just been 3 years older than I am right now, he would have stayed behind and fought for his freedom. But part of what I realized in Poland is that kids are just kids, even when they are escaping their homes before they were bombed. I really enjoyed giving out candy to all the children and seeing them smiling back at me. I know they needed essential supplies too, but who doesn't love candy? And most importantly, I think they sensed that we cared. The other part of the trip I will never forget is seeing everyone crossing the border out of Ukraine with their family pets. I would never leave my dog Rocket behind, and I know the Ukrainian children felt the same way about their pets. In addition to helping them find essential supplies and safe places to live, I think it's also important that we help the refugee children maintain hope. Hope that they can still finish school and get good jobs and be happy. And hope knowing that the people of this synagogue and the people of the world care about them and are behind them. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.